Folks, as you well know at home, Her Majesty the Queen has many, many great achievements, perhaps far too many to list on the show today. But is the Commonwealth Elizabeth II's greatest? She inherited a crumbling empire, of course, but she did devote herself to our imperial brethren. And I actually think the Commonwealth will be one of the family of free nations advancing trade and democracy that she can actually be incredibly proud of. So in this segment, I'm going to be discussing why is the Queen so central to the creation and the maintenance of the Commonwealth of Nations. With me now is the chairman of Global Britain Centre, Aman Singh Bogal. Hi, Aman. And chair of the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, Sunil Sharma. Hello, Sunil. Now, Amal, I'll start with you. Do you think the Commonwealth is actually Her Majesty's greatest achievement? It feels a little bit, you know, there is a hell of a lot to pack into those 70 years and pick one single thing out, isn't there? But the Commonwealth has been so important to Her Majesty.
Yes, indeed. 70 glorious years of this Elizabethan age, from the depredations of war to being the fifth biggest economy today, first monarch to celebrate a platinum jubilee, an icon of harmony and stability. Now, she's the head of state of 15 Commonwealth realms, and she has set the remarkable high bar of public life in duty, service and integrity, a glowing beacon of dignity and unity. And I think that she's the Commonwealth's greatest British role model. She's respected around the world, admired by generations. And the Commonwealth, I think, is Her Majesty's greatest achievement, a free coalition of free nations, united by choice in free democracy, free trade and free enterprise, rooted in shared values, shared languages and kinship. The truth is, our Queen is Global Britain, and Global Britain is our Queen. God save the Queen.
Absolutely. Sunil, do you think actually the Commonwealth will survive without Her Majesty the Queen? I was just discussing with my last guest there how Prince Charles actually is much more political than Her Majesty the Queen. Do you worry that actually some members of the Commonwealth may well disagree with some of the perhaps political stances taken by the Prince of Wales over his lifetime?
I think it may be a slight concern in the sense of how well the Queen has managed the last 70 years. You look at what happened during the sort of League of Nations, World War I, World War II, and there was a massive sort of issue in terms of what would happen when we saw so many countries going independent. And now sort of the concerns would be, sort of, I know what we're saying Prince Charles in terms of some of his statements he's made, but I think he understands the role when you become the head of the monarchy, that he'll have a massive team around him, and I think he'll have an understanding of what he can and can't say. I think just generally transitioning from the fact that we've had a monarch for 70 years who guided us through a very difficult period in terms of the Commonwealth, where we saw Australia go for a republic independence, and that may come back again. We saw South Africa leaving the Commonwealth and then rejoining later on again. So I think there's always going to be these sort of difficult circumstances that happen throughout history, and I think the Queen has managed that incredibly well. And I think it's not an easy role, and I think Charles will have to, in some ways, follow suit. The likelihood he won't have a monarchy nowhere near as long as the Queen's. So I think he'll be in good stead with a team sort of around him. I think the following him, William, I think we've got almost a perfectly ready-made head of monarch who seems to tick every box that there is alongside his wife. So I think they're in good shape. I do expect there to be the sort of, when we do move from the Queen to Charles, a sort of sentiment again across some Commonwealth countries should be, leave the Commonwealth. But I think it's over exaggerated. I think the impact that will have.
Aman, how do you think the Commonwealth actually and the Queen's role within the Commonwealth, as I said there at the start, in advancing actually trade, in advancing democracy, things that actually the Union Jack stands for, right, and that we should be proud of. Do you actually think the Commonwealth story projects an image of Britain as a soft power superpower?
I think it does, because let's face it, it is an organization that is unparalleled in history, that has come together of the free will of nations as equals. Every single member of the Commonwealth is an equal. And 15 of them, of course, are realms which Her Majesty is the head of state of. But we also have to realize that this Commonwealth that we have today, 70 years we're celebrating in the Queen's Jubilee. We're also celebrating this year 75 years of the Indian Republic. Now, it is in many ways that a lot of nations that are members of the Commonwealth have run their development course in parallel to the Queen's reign. And we have seen that free democracy, free enterprise, free trade, these are synonyms of global Britain. And the Queen, as our head of state, is very much the figurehead of all of that.
Do you actually think we're going to get an FTA with India then?
Well, the Prime Minister is absolutely ambitious, and so is Prime Minister Modi, that we have it by Diwali to celebrate that festival of prosperity and good over evil, meaning, trade over aid, and the fact that it is free enterprise that has lifted 70 Indians out of poverty every single minute. And I think we are very much likely to get that, yes.
Yeah. Sunil, what does the Commonwealth actually mean to you? Because some people will say, oh, Darren, give over, this is an anachronistic organisation, it harks back to empire. Actually, do you think there's a really positive story to tell about the Commonwealth?
I think that the Commonwealth, what you said at the sort of top of the segment, I think the Commonwealth is one of the Queen's greatest achievements in how well she's managed it over the last 70 years. The Commonwealth, in terms of on a practical level, pragmatic level, we have the shared history, shared values, shared beliefs, most of these countries are very democratic. So to me, on the purely pragmatic side, I think it makes sense with what's going on in terms of us leaving the European Union, building closer ties to a lot of countries who speak the same language as us, at the same style. We already have lots of crossovers in various different industries. So I think for me personally, I look at it and say, it's a group of countries, shared history, shared values. Yeah. We should be doing more things together, whether it's trade, whether it's human rights, whether it's immigration, there's so many different sides to it. And the likelihood is there'll be lots of countries where we work closer with. You've got Australia, Canada, in terms of the system and the setup. We see it already, where doctors can work in those countries. And, I think there's more that can be done in terms of the industry section. So I think that the Commonwealth is such a underused and undervalued thing that I think sometimes as Brits we often feel more embarrassed about it or ashamed about it than the actual Commonwealth countries. I always have to regularly say in my role that Commonwealth is a voluntary organisation. Everyone there is there by choice, not by force. So I think that's always something that we have to remind people.
It is really, really true, and it is a very different beast from something like the European Union, of course, which is a trade and political they bind themselves into the Brussels monetary union and other things, whereas the Commonwealth, you can come and go. But folks, I think that was a really, really cheery, optimistic way to end that discussion. Chairman of Global Britain Centre, Aman Singh Bogal, thank you very much, and Sunil Sharma, COO at the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth.